Today, we're going to be looking at awareness. And leaders often believe that they are more aware than they actually are. To choose joy is to increase your awareness. Joy means journey options you choose. Today, the knowledge specifically that we're going to be working with is how to define what self awareness is, recognize self perception and actual behaviors, and understand the joy mindset shift from reacting automatically to responding intentionally. You're also going to be identifying how awareness creates space for values based decision making. What if the biggest blind spot in your leadership is you? Most leaders never see that they are actually operating on autopilot. 95% of people believe that they're self aware, but only 10 to 15% truly are. That was from a Harvard Business Review in 2018. Oftentimes, we intend to do certain things, but we respond based on triggers. And we're going to look at what those unseen triggers could be. The science behind self perception, why the gap exists. This is really important. See, our responses, our reactions, the way we behave, our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions are actually wired within our mind, within our brain. And some of our actions and our behaviors come from our upbringing conditions. So here's one specific blind spot. It's the reactive versus reflective. What does this mean? How many of you have heard of the brain and the three operating systems within the brain? So you have the back of your brain, and sometimes in leadership and in brain teaching, they say this is the dinosaur brain. This is where the response is fight, flight, or freeze. And we have a dinosaur there because the T-Rex is like, ah, with short arms, and he freezes or he attacks and he fights. And then when we get into the mid level of the brain, this is the emotional part of the brain. It's part of the limbic system, and this is when decisions are made based on emotion. Then you have the front of the brain, and this is often it's referenced in education as the monkey brain, not my monkey, not my circus. And then you move up to the frontal cortex. That's right in here. This is your executive functioning. This is where the decisions are more rational. It's from your prefrontal cortex. And so when we look at the blind spot that happens on our automatic responses, what we're talking about is under stress, oftentimes the decisions that we make are emotion based, and it's coming out of the operation of the emotion part of the brain, which is the monkey part, very emotional. It's not necessarily happening with the prefrontal cortex, which is rational thought. And that's because individuals, myself included, we act impulsively. And after we act impulsively, then we rationalize our behavior. Oh, I was in pain. I wasn't feeling well. I had a headache. And that's where there's that gap in between the intended action and the actual action. So here's an example. A school principal receives a last minute email from a frustrated parent questioning a staff's decision. Under pressure, this principal fires off an email of defense. It's a defensive reply, only to regret minutes later that it was sent. And the principal realizes, oh, I shouldn't have sent that. That was probably not my best response. That response was coming from the limbic system. It was a reaction before the thought, the pause, and the rationality occurred. Because when we take a pause and we think about something before we automatically react, then we are operating more in the emotional state. And that's what this principal did. She operated in the emotional state before she took a breath, paused, Okay, let me just take a breath. Let me read this email and let me respond thoughtfully, diplomatically. The joy mindset, which is where we're going to dive into, because joy means journey options you choose. And when you're operating in the joy mindset, you're using your free will with awareness and you're making choices that are conscious decisions. They're very purposeful in what you're doing. So, in this particular instance, the joy mindset would invite the principal to pause, to breathe, and to respond with clarity rather than defensiveness. So, this is one of the brain responses that happens when we have a reactive emotional reaction. Here's another brain response, and this is confirmation biases. So, these are the filters that happen within our mind. So, when we have beliefs in our mind, we automatically are looking for information that aligns with our existing beliefs. And our mind is looking for patterns. We're looking to interpret that information based on our beliefs that are already in there. And because of that, that could really affect how we respond. So here is an example. Because remember, it's a filter. And so our mind is specifically looking for things that we already believe. So here's an example. A leader believes that they are approachable and open to feedback. So they only notice the moments when team members speak up while unconsciously dismissing the silence, the hesitation, the disengagement that actually signals the opposite. So, what I mean by that is here's a leader who believes that they are open to feedback and they're, giving professional development, or they are speaking with someone and they think that they're approachable, they think that they are open. However, they may not have the emotional intelligence to be able to identify that there's actually a bias happening in their biases that they believe they're approachable. And because of that, they're blindsided and they're not realizing that silence, hesitation, and disengagement are actually telling you something different than what you believe. So in this instance, the joy mindset is inviting the leader to pause and actually ask themselves and others, what feedback am I missing? What feedback am I filtering out? Am I paying attention to the audience? Am I noticing that some of the people in here are really quiet and have turned off? That's disengagement. Or am I paying attention that maybe some of the people in this group are not speaking out? Why not? Why are they not sharing their voice? So another question that this person could be asking, when we become aware and we realize that we do have confirmation biases, everyone does, what silence am I choosing not to hear? You see, awareness breaks the biases and it opens up the door to genuine connection. So when we choose to be aware, we are choosing to pay attention to the environment, to the people, and to the situation. Here is another conditioning that can happen. It's a social conditioning and it's a mask. There's all kinds of masks that can happen with social conditioning. In this particular one, this is the mask of confidence. The mask of confidence happens in many leadership cultures, and it is this. It is when leaders project false confidence and decisiveness very quickly. They come off very confident, they're very decisive, but it's false. And in cultures of high productivity, it's rewarded. However, because of this mask, because this is false, this is not real confidence, and this is actually false, where people are pretending to know the answers. These are when people are pretending to be confident. This is not the actual of, this is the pretending of, the falseness of it. Well, when this happens, this can discourage honest self-reflection and vulnerability. What do I mean by that? Here's an example. A senior director consistently projects calm and certainty in team meetings, even when he's unsure. You know the saying, fake it till you make it? Well, over time, his team stops bringing him problems early on because they assume he already has it handled. And so he mistakes that their silence is confidence in his leadership, when really it's a confidence mask and he's created distance. What that means is fake it till you make it is not the same as the joy mindset inviting individuals to unveil this mask, to pause and to choose vulnerability over performance and to lead from a place of authentic awareness. And that may mean that we don't actually have it all together, that we don't actually have all the answers. And so we remove the confidence mask and we may say something like, I don't have that answer right now. Let me look into that. Or the question goes back out to the group. What are your thoughts? What do you think? And it's a diplomatic exchange. So the social conditioning of the mask is also another form of breakdown that hinders a person from being self-aware. This is what it looks like. You're living your life, you're leading, you're doing your best, and you get triggered. And I'm going to talk about triggers later on, and then on another day, I'm going to actually dive into the skill of identifying your triggers. You have a trigger. From that trigger, there's an emotional reaction. What we're going to learn today is the joy awareness pause. Because when you get a trigger and you automatically have an emotional reaction, you're going to have an emotional response internally. When you take a moment to pause, that actually slows down your brain and it can move you into the prefrontal response where you're making a conscious decision. So let's remember, okay, we have our brain, we have the back of our brain, which is the dinosaur survival mode. Then we have the middle of our brain, which is the limbic system. That's your emotional area. And we're calling that the monkey mind. Then you have the front of your brain, which is your rational thought. This is your executive functioning area. Okay. So you have the dinosaur, the monkey, and the owl. The goal is to operate in the frontal cortex, your executive, the owl, right? And the way that you get there is by creating awareness. Because when you create awareness, it creates space for you to make different decisions. And the goal in the joy mindset is to make value-based decisions, decisions that are rooted in your core values. So the joy mindset invites an awareness pause. So here are the dangers of autopilot leadership. Without awareness, meaning conscious awareness, you're paying attention to your thoughts, your connections, your environment, your emotions, your actions, your behaviors, everything that's happening around you. Without that conscious awareness, leaders are often operating on autopilot and they're defaulting to ingrained habits. They're doing things that come naturally that they've been conditioned to do for whatever reason. And they also succumb to external pressures and they're acting on unexamined assumptions. Not good. This reactive stance can lead to decisions that actually contradict one's true intentions and core values. Let's move out of the danger zone. Okay. So, to move out of the danger zone, awareness is what is needed. And what's important to understand is that awareness doesn't change your situation. It's not going to change that you have to make a decision. It's not going to change that you have a skinny budget. It's not going to change the situation. What it is going to change is your relationship to the situation. This is a shift. It's a shift where the value-based leadership lives, okay? And let me tell you what I mean by that. Because when awareness is missing, self-awareness, here's some of the things that you see. You see individuals that are extremely defensive. You say something to them and they're automatically defending their position. This is a form of a lack of self-awareness. You also see people who have knee-jerking reactions. They react really quickly. They aren't actually taking the time to think about a response. They're just reacting as quickly as they can. And you also see a high level of burnout. Why? Because people are exhausted, emotionally exhausted. Now, picture some of these scenarios. You're having a bad day, things aren't going well. You snap at a team member. You just snap at a team member. You raise your voice. I don't agree with that, whatever it is. You get an email from that parent that's angry or a teacher who's calling you out, whatever it is, and you send it off really quickly in a reaction of rage. Or you say yes when really you mean no. And later on, when you have time to slow down, you ask yourself, why did I do that? And you know what? The answer is simple. You weren't fully present because we operate on autopilot all the time. It happens to all of us. Here's where the joy mindset comes in. The joy mindset interrupts the pattern of autopilot and it invites leaders to respond rather than react. It invites leaders to reflect rather than defend. So, Viktor Frankl said, between the stimulus and the response, there is space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. Okay, now remember I was talking about the brain, and you have the fight, flight, and freeze, the dinosaur brain. And then you have your limbic system, your monkey brain, where it's all emotional. You're just reacting to the situation. Not my monkey, not my circus, but it happens. We get pulled into the circus, right? And then you have your frontal, your executive functioning. This is your owl brain. In between these areas, there's the moment of pause and breath. Because joy is journey, options, you choose. And you can choose to react automatically, or you can choose to respond in peace. Now, let's look at the shift specifically for the joy mindset. When you're moving from reactive to intentional response, this means when you move to the response, this means that you're actually taking a moment and you're reflecting and you're making your decision based on a new moment. When you're in the reactive, it's an emotional response, monkey, driven by pressure, by habit, and by assumption. Now, when you move into the frontal cortex and you're in your executive functioning, the owl brain, this is where you're pausing and you're choosing responses that are aligned to your personal values and your purpose. Now, here is the beautiful thing. It is a skill, and you can learn how to do this You just have to practice. Because awareness invites leaders to pause long enough to choose differently. Through the mindset, the joy mindset, leaders develop the capacity to observe their thoughts, their emotions, and their behaviors, their actions that they are taking, moving them from the survival mode, right here, dinosaur reactions, to intentional leadership, which is executive functioning actions and responses. So it's moving them from reaction to response, moving them from dinosaur brain, fight, flight, or freeze, monkey, emotional, all the way to the frontal cortex. This is what the mind shift actually looks like. So when we're doing a mindset shift, I have 4 mindsets. There's the joy success quadrant. You take an assessment. When you take this assessment, you're going to land in one of these quadrants. And each of these quadrants has knowledge, skills, tools, and strategies that you use and you learn to progress to embodiment of the joy mindset. Okay. And when you take the assessment, it's really quick. It's a 10-question assessment, and you get your report emailed, and it's a very quick response. Like it automatically shows you based on your answers in the moment, because mindset is not static, it changes. It shows you where you're operating in that moment. So here's the example. In that quadrant, at the bottom left corner is the restricted mindset. In the restricted mindset, there's low joy and low awareness. Above that mindset is the awakened mindset. In the awakened mindset, it's high joy but low skill. Then in the corner, the right bottom corner is the natural mindset. The natural mindset is high skill but low joy. And then it's a competency quadrant. At the top is the joy mindset. And the joy mindset is high joy, high skill. So, in this respect, when we're shifting from the restricted mindset to the awakening mindset, this is what it looks like. So, the first behavior, which was the reactive behavior, we're moving that to a reflective behavior. What this means that the leader pauses before the limbic system overrides rational thought. And that means that they respond from clarity and values rather than impulsiveness and defensiveness. That was the first example. The second example that we had was filtering reality. Remember those biases? Well, this is moving from filtering reality to conscious choice, because we're fully aware that everyone has biases and we all have assumptions, and that we have filters that our mind is automatically operating on, because our mind wants to keep us comfortable. Our mind wants to keep us safe and protective. It wants us to be protected. And so it's looking for stuff that's going to keep us safe and comfortable. So, when we're moving from filtering reality to conscious choice, what that means is that leaders can recognize their actual confirmation biases. They actually can realize that there are blind spots because of their biases, and that these are creating their self-perception. So instead of going right off of their self-perception, they're realizing like, oh, okay, I have this bias that I think that if it's quiet, it's because there's no questions, and there's no questions because everybody trusts my leadership. And instead of that assumption, they're moving into intentional reflection over the autopilot assumption, and they're asking some critical questions that are going to support reality and real understanding, as opposed to what their assumptions are. The third one was the conditioned mask. Remember, we talked about the masks, that there's all kinds of different masks that happen with our upbringing, societal expectations, conditioning, things like that. But we have masks. And we talked about the confident mask. In this particular respect, whatever the conditioned mask is, leaders that have self-awareness, that are moving from restricted to awakening, an awakening mindset, they're able to uncover the social conditioning that shapes how they show up And they can choose to lead from their true values rather than just being present. Okay, that is really important that we understand because we can learn the skills. I'm teaching you the knowledge, but we can learn the skills on how to do this. So, this is what it looks like. The joy mindset is empowering leaders to live their values. So, first, we're looking at the trigger. What is the trigger? The trigger is a challenging situation that arises. Maybe it's a difficult conversation. Maybe it's a sudden setback. Maybe it's an urgent demand. We are employing awareness and we're noticing our internal reaction. What are our thoughts? What's our emotion? What's our physical sensation before we are reacting? Okay. This is a conscious observation and it creates space. We need to create that moment of pause to choose differently because we don't want to automatically react. We need a moment to respond. Take a moment to move into the prefrontal cortex, the owl brain. And then third, it's a value-based response, meaning at this point, we're intentionally choosing a response that aligns with our core values and the leader that we aspire to be, rather than reacting impulsively. So we're aspiring to be that better person. Why? Because we're not perfect. We make mistakes. It's natural, but we always want to work on getting better. So take a moment. Which of these shifts would make the biggest difference in your leadership right now? All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. Put it in the chat. Okay, now we're going to move into awareness. What is awareness? Awareness is simply the ability to notice what is happening in the moment. It's the ability to notice your thoughts, your emotions, how you are reacting to people, to events. And what's crucial to understand is it's about being honest with yourself without immediately judging when you realize the truth. Okay? It's okay to be self-honest. It's okay to have emotion. All the merit of emotion. There's nothing wrong with emotion. Emotion is energy in motion. It's how we choose to react or respond. Okay? And you can think of awareness as a muscle. You can train it. You can train your awareness muscle. It's not necessarily a personality trait that you're born with. It's something that you actually learn to get really good at. And let me give you an example. So when an insurance agent or a police officer is taking a report, the individual will ask multiple people. And oftentimes, each individual will always, but some of the details will be similar. Each individual will give a different report. Why? Because we are seeing things and experiencing from our own personal being. And so our biases, our conditioning, our thoughts, all of those things are in operation in our mind. So we're going to see things differently. We're going to experience things differently. That's why it's important to understand awareness. It matters because it allows and it gives, it provides the opportunity for space. When we can look at things differently, we can feel them, we can hear them, we can see them, we can take it all in, and we're aware of our biases, we're aware of our perceptions, we're aware of our conditioning, then we can have our personal agency restored because we can recognize our patterns in real time and we can reclaim our power to choose differently as opposed to automatically responding in a reactive emotional way. That's why awareness matters. It's key to self leadership. Let's look at a leadership impact, the power of awareness. So there are 7 domains in this leadership framework right here. We've got self-awareness, emotional intelligence, communication, conflict management, time management, decision making, and resilience under pressure. Now, when an individual is unaware, they don't have a high level of self-awareness, then in the area of self-awareness, they're unaware of their personal triggers and they react without reflection. If a person is aware, has a high level, a high skill of self-awareness, then they will pause to notice their triggers before responding. Let's look at emotional intelligence because these are leadership traits. Now, if a person has a high level of awareness under emotional intelligence, then no, if they don't have awareness, they don't have awareness. If they don't have awareness under emotional intelligence and they receive feedback or someone is talking to them and they don't like it, they're going to respond defensively. They'll let their emotions dictate their actions and their words. That's what happens when a person has a low level of self-awareness. Now, a person with high emotional intelligence, high awareness, they will regulate their emotions and they will respond thoughtfully and they will model composure because they have a high level of emotional intelligence and they have a high level of emotional regulation. I want to throw in here, we're not talking about people who are manipulating, who have a high level of emotional intelligence that are actually manipulating the situation. Someone like that who's using their emotion to manipulate actually has a high level of emotional intelligence. They're just using it for manipulation. Okay, so let's make sure we're clear on that. Communication, the area of leadership for communication. Someone without awareness is going to have a strained atmosphere. Meetings are going to be tense and unproductive. Why? Because they're not a good communicator. They could raise their voice, they could be defensive, they could be authoritative. They can do different types of communication, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, and they're not aware of how they are showing up and how it creates a response from others around them. Now, someone who has a high level of awareness when it comes to communication, the atmosphere will be more calm. There will be inquiry. There will be clarifying questions that are asked, and it'll be a safe space for dialogue. In the area of conflict management, someone without awareness will ignore problems and they will force a quick fix. Why? Because they want to avoid the conflict and they would rather get it over with as quick as possible. Now, someone with a high level of awareness, they're going to have more productive dialogue. What that means is that they're going to facilitate some conversations, they're going to address the root causes, and they're not going to personalize it for the individual or for themselves. Team management. Someone without awareness in the area of team management can be disconnected. Now, when they are the manager of the team, they may do things like dismiss when people speak rather than to support. They could do different types of behaviors that are creating a disconnected team. Now, when they're self-aware, in the area of team management, they're willing to receive and reflect on feedback, and they actively listen and support growth for themselves and for others. In decision making, as a leader, we have to make decisions, and there is a decision making uh, there's decision making frameworks. There's ways for that are more productive to make decisions. If you don't have awareness, a high level of awareness, then you could easily come to decision fatigue. Why? Because you can make choices in the heat of the moment and you're leading with regret. You're trying to just get things as quickly as you can, just get it done, get it done without slowing down, pausing, having peace, and reflecting. If you have lots of awareness, then your decision making is values led action. It means that your decisions are thoughtful and you're aligning them with your actual core values. Who are you as a leader and who do you aspire to be? You're looking at your decisions through that lens. And I'm going to be doing another one. You can look for the video. It's specifically on decision making and value led decision making. The last leadership area that we're looking at is resilience under pressure. Now, resilience is the ability to bounce back from a setback, bounce back from a difficult situation. Okay, we all have stress, we all have difficult situations, but some people will operate in the dinosaur. They will fight, they will flight, and they will freeze. And when something bad happens, they freeze, they get stuck. We don't want you operating in the dinosaur mind, and we don't want you operating in the emotional, where you're super reactive. We are looking at executive functioning, resilience under pressure without awareness looks like overwhelmed by stress. Stress clouds judgment and it models high anxiety. Now, resilience under pressure with high level of awareness looks like grounded under pressure, maintaining your composure, and modeling calm for the team. Awareness ultimately equips leaders to show up in critical moments, shifting them from reactive patterns to intentional, impactful choices. Here's the key. You don't need hours. You need moments. The awareness pause takes 30 seconds and it can change your entire day. And you can do this all day long. Here's a quick understanding of personal triggers. So personal triggers are situations, words, behaviors, or environments that spark an immediate emotional and physiological reaction based on a past experience, a belief, or an unmet need. They often activate before we consciously think about them. So a trigger is something that pushes an emotional button, and there's all kinds of triggers. Stay tuned for the video on triggers, or look it up on YouTube on my channel on Joy Journey Options You Choose, because there's a video specifically on triggers. We're going to dive into the Joy tool using the Joy Mindset 5-step awareness pause technique. We started off with knowledge, our knowledge of awareness. Now we're going to dive into the technique of the Joy Mindset 5-step awareness pause. The first step is number 1, notice the trigger. Recognize the moment. What just activated me? 2, pause. Take a breath. 3, name the experience. Identify the thought, the emotion, the physical sensation. Number 4, reconnect to your values. What matters most in this situation? And number 5, choose your response. Act intentionally rather than reacting impulsively. You're shifting from automatic reaction to intentional response. You're moving from the restricted mindset to the awakening mindset. Here is a real world example. This is Melanie. Let's learn a little bit about Melanie. Melanie is a principal. Okay. So Melanie is a principal at a mid-size urban elementary middle school. So they do K-8. And she's served in her role for 5 years and remains deeply passionate about her school community. Melanie is committed. Okay. Lately, she's been operating on autopilot, constantly reacting to crisis from district administrators, teachers, parents, students, rather than leading with intention. She has had a high level of stress lately, and she feels disconnected from her core values, and she questions whether she's making an impact, especially because she loves her job. Let's look at what Melanie's challenges are. So, Melanie's challenges are she's overwhelmed by the demands of the district administrators, teachers, parents, and students. And she's struggling to balance instructional leadership with daily operational fires. Been there. I was an administrator and there was never a dull moment. That was one of the things I loved about being an administrator was that I was never bored. And Melanie also feels isolated in her role and uncertain about her leadership approach. She's never taken the time to slow down, reflect, and learn about herself on how she can do better because she's always in the fire. Now, another one of her challenges that she needs to learn how to recognize her patterns of stress and reactivity that doesn't serve her or her team. Those are Melanie's challenges. Principal Melanie. Okay, let's see how Principal Melanie handles this stress in her situation after working with Joy. So Melanie is clearly ready to shift from restricted to awakening. Why? Because she's stressed out, she's unhappy, and she's ready to quit. Okay. And she wants to reclaim her sense of purpose. She's doing this because she loves what she does, but right now she ain't feeling it. Okay. So, based on Melanie's information, working directly with her, here's what we realize. When she gets triggered, she felt her chest tighten the moment the district email arrived. She paused. She stepped away from her desk and she took a slow breath before she responded to the high stress email. She named her experience. She said, I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm afraid of losing control. 4, she reconnected to her values. What matters most to her right now? What mattered most to Melanie is that her team's trust is intact and that her students have good well-being. The well-being of her students and her staff was high priority for her. Notice what's missing. Her own self-care. That wasn't what came to her mind when she paused and she reconnected to her values. When she paused and reconnected to her values, the first thing that came to her mind of a reconnect to core value was about others. It was about her students and it was about her staff. That's important to recognize, okay? And if you check out my other video when I talk about self-care, you'll understand why joy is journey options you choose. And it's about spirit, mind, heart, meaning your thoughts, your heart, and your body. It's a holistic wellness, and you need to be at that core because leadership starts with oneself. That's the operation in the natural mindset when we talk about sustainable joy. And number 5, Melanie said, I'll schedule a calm conversation instead of sending a reactive reply. Isn't that awesome? Melanie went through these 5 steps in this awareness pause, and she got this email and she was stressed about it. But instead of just reacting in the email, she took a break and she went through these 5 steps, the 5 step awareness pause. So here's what happened. Before the awareness pause, Melanie was emotionally reactive, had a strained atmosphere, disconnected from her team, and she had decision fatigue. After she did the joy mindset 5 step awareness pause, she actually chose intentionality, meaning she noticed her internal triggers before speaking to others, before sending the emails. She had calm inquiry. She paused, took a breath, and asked clarifying questions instead of defending her position. And she had productive dialogue. So she had conversations in safe spaces for collaboration and problem solving, meaning she created an atmosphere, an environment where people felt safe. And I have another video on psychological safety, creating that kind of comfort zone. And then she had values led action. Decisions became more thoughtful, which helped Melanie to earn lasting trust with her staff. So Melanie made it past her 5 years because she realized that she could slow down and she could do the joy mindset 5 step pause. Ultimately, the external environment was mounting pressure and she had staff concerns. And the external environment did not change overnight. That's important to recognize. I told you that early in the beginning. But what was important was that Melanie's awareness changed how she led within the organization. It proved that the most profound change that a school principal can make starts where? Within. Yeah. Self-leadership. It starts within. That's such a powerful understanding that joy, journey options you choose, is about our free will and our personal agency. And that's what Melanie learned. She reflected on the period of constant pressure and she shared, I realized my immediate reactions were closing doors before I had even opened the conversation. You've seen it before when people are like, you go up to them, they're like, a sigh. It could stop you in your tracks and you don't say anything because you can read their body language, and their body language is definitely not open to what you have to say or to discuss a problem, right? And she said she was leading from stress, not from her values. So, joy is journey options you choose. Joy is your free will. Self-leadership is where it begins, and that's internally. Take the joy mindset. It's on joyoptions.org, and it's right at the top. It says discover your mindset and be prepared to get clarity, confidence, communication, connection, and collaboration. Thank you for your time. Remember to like, follow, and share this video. These are the intellectual property of joy. We've got joy journey options you choose, the joy success system, the joy mindset quadrant, restricted mindset, awakening mindset, natural mindset, joy mindset, sustainable joy, lead with joy, shine with purpose, rise with confidence. One of my favorites. It's a cool framework. Joy neutral, joy upgrade, sustainable joy, joy consciousness, joy conscious function, joy free will conscience, joy cognitive operating system, joy energy emotion system, and joy somatic sustainable system. Those last ones are in the natural mindset, and I am so excited about the videos that are coming out. So thank you for your time, and be sure to like, follow, and share.